Hello and welcome to this very special episode where I sit down with Charlotte Romanet, who is a mother of three. Charlotte became a doula client of mine when she was pregnant with her first baby, Theo, and she had her first baby through Prince of Wales Hospital. And it was a very beautiful vaginal birth of a beautiful baby boy. And then she reached out a few years later, pregnant again with her twins. And Charlotte and I really wanted to sit down and record and talk about her twin birth because she had a really profound journey and she had a subsequent beautiful, beautiful birth of her very sweet twins. And so we wanted to sit down and talk about this because her journey has been it's been a bumpy road, I would dare to say, and she had so many learnings along the way. And Charlotte, to me, is such a powerful, powerful woman. She has a deep internal wisdom and intelligence and a hunger for educating herself and having the right support and really she's very good at looking out for herself and looking after herself. And she has done that so profoundly in this birth journey or birth journeys that she's had. And I think we learn so much when we hear each other's stories. And Charlotte's story covers a lot of elements in terms of twin and breech births. And she's she went from not wanting a natural vaginal birth to having a natural vaginal birth for her first baby. So she's sort of has such a wide gamut of information that she has gathered on her motherhood journey, which is just in itself such a beautiful story to listen to. So I hope you enjoy the story. Of course, it is. I really recommend that you share this with anyone who has twin pregnancies or are expecting twins or are having expecting a breech birth, because I think it helps women so much when we get to hear these stories where there has been changes in the viewpoints and our beliefs throughout the pregnancy, and hearing the stories where women actually had to carve out the care that they wanted for themselves. I think hearing that it is possible, to go outside the norm, it is possible to ask for the help that you really want to have and the care that you want to have, and ultimately the care that you deserve, which is meant to be the way you want it. So please feel free to share this episode. I have enjoyed so much to follow Charlotte's journey, and it's been a beautiful end to that journey, recording this episode and talking together. There will be a part 2 to this episode where we have Dr. Andrew Bisits join us and getting his insight into the birth experience of the twin birth for Charlotte Romanet. Thank you so much and enjoy. So welcome, Charlotte. I am so glad we could carve out some time to do this conversation. We have had a long journey together, which I am so grateful for, that I've been your doula for all 3 of your babies, 2 of the births. And we wanted to do this recording and talk about your births, particularly your twins, because it has been such a unique journey. And what we have realized, and you particularly, how difficult it is to navigate the system. So this is why we're doing this. We're both mothers and sleep deprived, so that's fun. Good luck to us. But Charlotte, would you mind just giving us a brief overview of who you are and just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thank you so much for doing this with me. I'm really excited to be able to share my story and my journey. So I'm Charlotte. I'm half French, half American. I'm 40 years old. I moved to Australia permanently from Paris, France 7 years ago, and made the decision in 2019 to become a single mother by choice, having not found Mr. Right at that point. And so I went through fertility clinic, obviously, and did IUIs, which didn't work, and then went through IVF. And I am now a mother of 3 children, all from the same unknown donor, IVF conceived. Theo, who is 2 years old and 7 months, so a little over 2.5, and twins Arthur and Ella, who just turned 7 months old yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, that will stop most people in their tracks anyways. You know, being a single mom to one is plenty, let alone twins, and
Oh,
all
well, yeah,
under
the twins weren't
three.
really planned. It was more of the one was so amazing that I was like, I'll go for a second. And yeah, now I have three. So yeah.
Actually, what was that like for you, hearing that you were having twins? I mean, I remember our conversation, but tell the listeners.
So this is where I went into that twin pregnancy in a very different state of mind as with Theo, because the reason I ended up with twins is because I'd had a pretty traumatic year for a variety of reasons, many, many reasons, and that included back-to-back miscarriages. And after these back-to-back miscarriages, I started just losing confidence in the fact that I would have another baby and losing trust in my remaining frozen embryos. I had two left. They were the lowest quality of the batch. They were, I was even told by the lab technician, oh, they can be your backup embryos. And so I thought, well, I'll
Mm,
just put both in because I don't want to go through more loss. So, I mean, Dr. Faye, my fertility specialist and OB with Theo, kept telling me you could have twins. And I was just like, nah, that's not going to happen. I mean, I'm going to either have a miscarriage or they're not going to take, you know? Um, so in a way, I knew I would have, there was a big risk of twins, but I didn't believe it was real. Like in my
mm.
mind, it was impossible that that would happen. So when we found out it was twins at the 7 week scan, you know, Dr. Faye was like, well, there you go. I told you twins. And I was like, no, no. So there's a lot of denial and shock. And I hadn't, but you know, you're in such a state of mind after miscarriages that you don't think really rationally either. So I hadn't even done like a budget. Can I even afford twins? Can I even, you know, I just went into it like I'm not going to have twins anyway. So knew it was a big risk, but didn't think it would actually happen. And
Mm,
initially not too happy about it, but
mm.
now love both of them so much, and I can't imagine only having one of them.
There is no world without both of them. All three, of course, but yeah,
Of course,
I'm
yeah.
so glad you did it. Yeah, I remember your voice was different when we spoke on the phone. I remember just I could hear that you had this like I want to call it like an out of body, like this is happening. Like it was like we were talking about you in third person, that like this is happening to you. It was yeah, I really felt that with you in just the coming to grips with it and all the things that that means in terms of your life changing. Three
And
kids.
one of the biggest ones actually in the moment was, it's weird, but it was having to grieve having a home birth. Like you go through, you grieve so many things, but not grieve, but you go through so many emotions. And there was also this grief around, now it's a high risk pregnancy, you know,
Yes.
and that was huge too. And that was hard to process, let alone how am I going to manage three kids on my own, you know,
Yeah.
financially and logistically. But that I remember was tough in the moment.
Yeah, which is why we're here, because of this high risk element and how hard that is to navigate for someone like you who wanted a, you know, a potential home birth or at least a very, you know, low intervention birth. Could you give us your version of, so Theo is your firstborn. Do you want to give us just like the broad strokes of his beautiful birth? And then we'll dive into the twins after that.
So with Theo, it's really interesting. I'm kind of a one step at a time person. That's why I probably thought about the grieving the home birth before I even thought about having twins. I was like in the moment. And with Theo, I hadn't thought about how I'd give birth at all until I was pregnant. And kind of just picked Dr. Faye as my OB because she was my fertility specialist, not really doing any research on OBs. My initial assumption going into the pregnancy was, oh, I'll just have an epidural or a C-section. That's what everyone I know has had. They've had either one or the other. I'm fine with that. You know, I think there was almost this underlying assumption as well that um, intervention helps reduce trauma because pain is trauma and giving birth
Mm,
naturally is painful. So, hence, I thought,
right.
oh, you know, this makes sense to have a C section or an epidural to have a lovely birth experience, right? But then lots of things just kind of fell into place. I think there's a lot of luck that led me to so I just kind of I was carried onto this journey in a way. I wasn't proactive about it. Um, when I say luck, I mean, we were in the peak of COVID, so the borders were closed, which wasn't great, but it meant that that's what brought me to you because I couldn't have my mom as my birth partner. And it would have been a very different experience if she had been my birth partner instead of you. um, Bless her, love her to death. But yeah, it's, you know, as you know, and you know her a little bit.
Yeah.
And I remember asking Dr. Faye, like, well, you know, what are my options? And she recommended a doula and she recommended you. And that's already, you know, telling of Dr. Faye and her approach. She's just a very relaxed, easy person to work with. She works really well with doulas, and I was just lucky to end up with her as my OB as well. Here I am with the perfect birthing team for a birth that I didn't even know I wanted. And I think, you know, talking to you about birth was really great for me. I like preparing myself too for things. So I really enjoyed hearing about, labor and birth. And wanted to learn as much as I could about giving birth at that point. And I did a she birth class, which was great. And I was reaching out to as many people as I could to hear their birth stories. What I found really interesting was that most birth stories I heard, there was always a dramatic element to them. And typically,
Mm,
and there was always intervention, except for two. There are two birth stories that were an exception, but all of them were dramatic with, oh, and then we need an emergency C-section or forceps, or I need to have an induction with Syntocin. And, there was always something dramatic and not always traumatic, although I think there's a lot of trauma too that women don't want to admit, but always a bit dramatic, right?
mm,
And then there are these two friends of mine who describe their birth experiences as peaceful, beautiful, magical. They use really strong, powerful words, like they felt empowered. And the thing in common that they both had was that they hadn't used any intervention. I found that really intriguing. And that was because that kind of ruined my initial assumption heading into the pregnancy. Um, One of them is a very spiritual person. She did hypnobirthing, and I thought, well, I can't relate to that. That's way too far from who I am. But the other one works in finance at my company. So she's like me, a very rational numbers person. And hearing her tell me about her birth story, I thought, well, that's very weird. Like I can relate to you, but not to your story. So that really sparked my interest and my curiosity. And I reached a point where, thanks to you two and the She Births course, I wanted to see how far I could go without intervention. I was curious to see what my body could do. And then you have to keep reminding yourself, which is insane, that giving birth is just natural and normal, that it doesn't actually require intervention in most cases. In some cases, yes, but not in most cases. I was having a zero complication pregnancy as well, so there was no reason to justify intervention. Um, and yeah, I was curious to see how far I could go. And I started getting really excited, and I couldn't wait to experience all these things that I had heard about and learned about through you and She Births, especially all these things they were talking about, because again, I'm a fact numbers person. Hormones and the hormones that go through your body, and how the mental state affects the hormone balance and the messages sent to your baby, and et cetera. And I could not wait to experience it myself. And I was surprised myself that I made it to the end with Theo and managed to push him out without an epidural. Um, I it was actually a really textbook labor, I would say. Like everything they describe in the She Births course and that you would describe to me, it was exactly what happened to me. Zero complication labor, zero complication birth. I just pushed him out, and couldn't believe I made it until the end. I remember even being shocked in that moment of like, oh, I made it. And it wasn't that hard. And it was
this is it.
amazing. Yes. Um, and the first thing I told myself myself as soon as he came out, the first thing was, this was awesome. I want to do it again. And it actually freaked
Wow.
me out because I thought, hey, maybe meet your son before you get pregnant again. you know? Um, but I was almost sad it was over. But
Wow.
then
I
really
love
excited to
this.
meet him as well. But that was the first thought that went through my mind.
Interesting. I mean, let's pause for effect. I mean, to have that feeling after doing something that, is hard and is such a challenging event, but to then immediately just almost be sad that it's over. That's pretty, and I really relate. I get it. I know exactly what you mean, and the feelings, and that just the high of, and also just
Mm.
doing something that incredible that we can do that and then wanting to do it again. I get it. That's pretty, but how beautiful to hear that. And what's so interesting about this is that you came from the opposite viewpoint. Not necessarily, it's not like you had an idealistic point view of like, you don't want to ruin your body. This is often something I hear for people who do elective C-sections, let's say, or whatever, or just like a general distrust in their body. You never had that. You were just, I think you were very pragmatic about it and just like,
Yep.
well, A plus B must mean C. And so let's go that way. And then you educated yourself and you had this completely different, you ended up a completely different place than where you started. It's been such a beautiful journey to see. So yes, so Theo was born. as you said, incredibly textbook, if we can call it that, beautifully supported, and you were just very powerful, very grounded, and you went through all the waves of hormones and emotions that we typically see in a natural, undisturbed birth. So let's talk about the twins, because having a home birth with twins isn't really possible in Australia. And going back to Dr. Faye wasn't what you did. You did something different. So let's talk about what the twins looked like.
Yes. So it was really had this amazing, and you said it, it's this birth high, had this amazing birth high with Theo. But then looking back at it, because I'm also an analytical person, pragmatic analytical, I was like, okay, what would I want differently in the next time, like the next time I give birth? And there were the one thing that bothered me the most was that in the hospital they made me lie on my back so that they could monitor his heart rate. And that made my pain levels really shoot up, because you're saying I was amazing, but you guys were also amazing. You and Dr. Faye, you were really great support team for me, and you helped me manage the pain, because yes, it was painful, and yes, it was very intense, but it was very manageable as long as I had the freedom to move the way I wanted to, and get the support I needed from you guys. Once I was pinned to that bed, basically, and I felt like I was, the pain levels just became too high, and I said yes to gas. And I almost regretted that, because I was like, well, it wasn't completely natural. Like I really, so I was like, okay, next time I want to go even more natural. I want to, push myself even further, because I know I can do this. And that's why I was thinking about home birth. I wasn't very happy with my private hospital stay, and that was the main reason I stopped my private insurance cover for the second pregnancy. And that's kind of why Dr. Faye, she was still an option, but not as obvious as if I had had that private insurance cover. And my plan was to do a home birth with the MGP. So I thought, I'll get into the MGP. I know it. They support home births. They love them. And I did get in, actually. I got in. Problem is, as you said, home births with twins are not really an option in Australia.
Mm.
So as soon as they found out it was twins, they moved me to the twin clinic. I was still talking to Dr. Faye, because in my mind, I was thinking, if I'm not happy with this, I'm willing to spend the money to have Dr. Faye by my side. But she also spoke highly of the twin clinic. So that's how I ended up in the twin clinic, which was I didn't realize it at first, but going to be they were going to be pushing me in a direction that was like the total opposite of what I wanted. And so I went in very hopeful, based on MGP and Dr. Faye saying how amazing the twin clinic was. And I think, yes, they are amazing. They are amazing because, yes, a lot of twin pregnancies, a lot of multiples pregnancies are extremely high risk and need OBs to intervene to help the babies survive. They need C-sections. They need, inductions at certain times. They need, like, I get it. I'd say even most multiples pregnancies require intervention, from a medical perspective. But it took me a long time to realize this. Mine didn't, because
Mm.
they kept putting me in the same box as all the other twin pregnancies. But mine I was having zero complications. I had a very successful first birth experience with Theo, but I was being put in the same box as everyone else, and just labeled, high risk, whether I liked it or not. And initially they seemed very open. They said, oh, we support vaginal births and we recommend having an epidural, but you don't have to. So I was quite hopeful. But when I said, well, great, I don't want an epidural, then I could see like the panic build up in them. And they're like, oh, we need her to get an epidural. So then the
Let's
pressure started building.
Why were they recommending an epidural?
Well, I have a few ways of answering that. I think that the high level answer is, there's a lot, they're very scared. So there's a lot of fear within the medical world itself, that something's going to go wrong. And with an epidural, they can be in control because you can't move. And so if you can't move, it's easier for them to, well, take you in for an emergency C-section, or for them to do an manual extraction, or for them to intervene. Whereas, if you're moving around and you're walking around, they can't monitor heart rates as consistently and continuously. That's much harder, and they want that, they want the continuous monitoring throughout. So I think they lose control when you don't have an epidural. And so there was that. And then what they were telling me was not that, of course. What they were telling me was, so it started out with things like, started out pretty soft. You know, they were saying, oh, well, you know, we recommend an epidural because twin B will most likely need to be manually extracted, which means we'll have to put our hand up to grab twin B, which is, and they used my terms against me, which was really interesting. They said, which will be traumatic in terms of a pain perspective if you don't have an epidural. So you're going to have birth trauma if you don't have an epidural. They were kind of using those terms. But then it kept escalating because I kept saying, I don't want one, I don't want one, I don't want one. And it reached a point where a registrar actually told me that he knew OBs who would take me in for a C-section if I didn't have an epidural for twin B.
Yeah.
So again, they were using my arguments against me. They're saying, you don't want birth trauma? Have an epidural. You don't want a C-section? Have an epidural. But all of that became pointless when my twin A was breech, which I'm now really grateful he was.
The
But at the
saving
time,
grace.
yes, at the time was really nervous about, because a twin A being breech means no vaginal birth, means automatic C-section with the twin clinic.
Yeah, that's right.
So
But that's not
epidural
what happened.
talks just went out the window. No, it's
Yeah.
not. But initially that was, we stopped even talking about epidurals at that point because they're like, well, twin A is breech, so C-section, period.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So what happened next? How did you navigate that? What did you do next?
Well, starting, I think I started escalating my concerns from the very first appointment. So my first appointment was around 16, I was around 16, 17 weeks pregnant. And what worried me back then was more about the mental health, because there are so many things that were happening at the same time. There was how they were pushing me into this corner and how I was going to give birth, but there was also my mental state and the fact that I was going through pregnancy after loss anxiety, which is a real thing after women have had miscarriages. And them pushing me into a certain direction was just making that anxiety even worse. So I started talking about all that with a social worker. And so I started those discussions with him, and he was reaching out. I would talk to him almost every month, at least once a month. And he was really nice and kind and listening and trying to find ways to help me. So that was kind of what started the whole kind of escalation journey. And when I realized they were forcing me to have, they were going to, well, not forcing me, but they were, practically forcing me or scaring me into having an epidural, I would say. And then when I found out twin A was breech, Arthur was breech, and that meant automatic C-section, I ramped up the escalation to the social worker. And I also started reaching out to anyone else who would listen. I mean, I reached out to you a lot, and you were trying to help me as best you could too on your end, from an education perspective, to just challenge what they were telling me. And reached out to Dr. Fay, I managed to talk to a few midwives by begging doctors to let me talk to midwives, because you don't talk to midwives in the twin clinic either. That really shocked me. So I was escalating anyone who would listen, I would just escalate my concerns. And what bothered me the most, with the reason I escalated even more once we found out he was breech, is because I kept asking them why singletons can be born breech but not twins. And I never got a good answer, because there isn't one.
Oh, I think I've lost your sound. Can you?
So
There.
like, I am going to experience birth trauma. I am going to go, I'm heading straight. Are you still there? Yeah. I am heading straight into birth trauma, because I'm going to have a, pretty major, I'm going to have major surgery and miss out on so many amazing things about a natural birth. Not knowing why, not actually knowing why it was necessary. And that's when I really, my anxiety reached panic levels, and my escalations reached panic levels. And I think I even told you and a social worker, I think I told a few people, I said, it's reaching a point now where I am not going to show up for my scheduled C-section, and I'm going to hide at home until I give birth, potentially in my living room.
Yeah,
Which would have
wow.
been horrific for lots of reasons. But I was terrified of birth trauma. And I knew I would experience a C-section that I didn't understand why I needed as birth trauma.
That is such a, like, just what a powerful sentence, because correct me if I'm wrong, like you would do a C-section if it meant, that was the
100%,
best thing for your baby. It's not like you're
100%.
against C-section or any of the things that you're not against an epidural either.
No.
And this is what's so crucial is that because you had a previous experience of what a natural physiological birth feels like and what it is and what it can do to you, especially also in the postpartum. But because you had this knowledge, you couldn't settle for just that standard, which majority of women and couples will settle for because we just equate that to, oh, well, the doctor is saying this, well, then that must be the case. And that's enough for most people, probably because they don't have the level of experience that you've had. And probably also, I think your personality speaks to it a lot too. Like you're a very powerful woman, when you put your mind into something and when you understand something, you can take it very far. It's in like you go places with your information. It's very, very admirable. But that's so interesting that had they given you a really sound and reasonable reason for having the C-section or an epidural even, you would have gone, okay, sounds great, let's do it. But it wasn't there. It doesn't exist. The reason isn't there.
They almost, like, I understood, like, you're completely right. Like, if twin A had been transverse, I would have
Yeah,
gone, yeah, I have to have a C-section. I would have been very sad, but it wouldn't have been traumatic, you
correct.
know?
Yeah.
Um, and I remember the last registrar is actually giving me the chills. The last appointment I had was in twin clinic. I was 32 weeks pregnant. And the registrar was trying to tell me that Arthur was transverse. And I said, well, the sonographer told me he was oblique. And she goes, no, he's transverse now. And you know what that means? I said, yeah, it means a C-section. But the sonographer again told me he was oblique, not, so he was just a little, he had gone from completely breached to just a little tilted, but that didn't mean he would stay that,
Transverse.
like, and he was still bummed down. And um and that's exactly right. And I think she was just like, well, you lost, and that was, and it was almost this, there's this horrible tension building up between me and the twin clinic. And I feel for them. I actually really feel for them because I think their training and the OBs that they support and represent, tell them, push the women in this direction. And if we don't want to go in that direction, it's a problem. It's a problem. Um,
Well,
so I
you
do feel
become
for them
a
because it's not
problem.
their fault, because they're just trained that way. That's what they're told to tell us and do. And I think they are afraid. They're afraid of getting sued. They're afraid of all these dramatic things happening. Um, and they don't care about your mental health, because I could have sued them for birth trauma, but they don't actually think about that. And that's harder to sue. It's harder to sue for birth trauma than it is to sue for, um, you know, a horrible complication happening during labor or birth, right?
Of course.
Um, so yeah, you're exactly right. That was the thing. It's that they weren't giving me good arguments. And I think I
Mm.
had brain surgery 2 years ago, and that's one of the reasons I had trauma before I got pregnant. And yeah, I didn't question the surgeon once. He said, I'm gonna open your skull, like, et cetera. I could take the tumor out. Like, it's, but this, you're right. It's because I had had that education. My eyes were open. I was like, this is not good enough. You're
Mm.
contradicting all these things that I learned and that I actually experienced myself.
Yeah, you were living evidence for it, and you were too smart for them, to be honest. Their scare tactics didn't work, and thank goodness for that. But what a ride! I mean, that I just want to I want everyone to understand that certainly like you spent so much time juggling your options and navigating this lack of the system, like navigating lack of care and working out where to go and who to speak to. Like you've said, like you've reached out to everyone you could. Like that was a hard journey from where I'm sitting. Like that was just, I really felt for you in terms of just how much you had to navigate and how much you had to just scramble to get someone to take you seriously and not see you as a rebellious, problem walking the halls of the hospital. Um, and that's not fair. No pregnant woman should feel that way. That was really not okay. Um, so what happened next?
So right after my 32-week appointment, the social worker contacted me and said that him and one of the midwives I had managed to talk to had arranged for me to meet with Dr. Bisits. And I, at the time, just knew him as, this breech expert. And I thought, well, at the very least, he may give me a good explanation as to why a breech twin can't be born vaginally. At the very least, he may
Yeah.
actually be able to talk to me about breech births and tell me why he recommends a C-section. Um, and it's funny because it kind of coincided with when because I was doing all this research in parallel with you too. We were reaching out to people all over, even in the U.S.
Yeah.
To try to get across birth stories that were a bit similar to mine, but with happy endings, or pregnancy stories that were similar to mine with happy endings. And Dr. Bisit's name came up quite a few times actually. So, and there was this podcast recorded by a mother who was based south of Wollongong and actually drove 4 to 5 hours just to get to see Dr. Bisit's with her twins because both of her twins were breech. She was going through the exact. I listened to her podcast. I had chills because it was the exact same thing I was experiencing with Twin Clinic, and I felt like I was alone. I felt like no one else. All the other
Mm.
mothers were saying they were happy with it because, like you said, they're told you need an epidural, they go, oh, I'm going to trust my doctor. Let's go for it. And they're sometimes even relieved because, oh, I don't have to worry about the pain, or, oh, C-section, great, my body will stay intact or, whatever. So they're happy to go with it. But this mother like me had a really positive first birth experience and fought really hard. And she mentioned Dr. Bisit's, and then I listened to her journey and I was like, oh my God, I want this to happen to me, but I wasn't sure it would until I actually met with Dr. Bisit's. I was so hopeful though. I reached a point of and he postponed our initial appointment, and I was so nervous when he contacted me. The fact that he contacted me directly too was just amazing. Like he just called me and I was like, he's like, this is Dr. Bisit's. I'm like, since when? The Twin Clinic, you go in, you don't know who you're going to meet with. Someone grabs your file, you don't even know the name of the doctor. Like it's just so impersonal. And here's this guy's never met me calling me on my mobile. Like it was crazy. And he postponed my appointment, and I was so nervous he'd cancel or say, too bad you're having a C-section, etc. Anyway, but very grateful to have an appointment with him, to have a chance to just talk to him, and met with him. And that appointment was so pivotal. I will remember it my whole life.
Mm.
He first thing he said was, "How can I help you?" I
Mm.
was floored because it had been months since I felt like anyone actually wanted to help me, but also listen to me. Um, at the Twin Clinic, you go in for an appointment. It's like they have a checklist of let's check your blood pressure, your, iron levels, your latest scan. What are your symptoms? How do you feel? Are they growing right? Tick, 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 tick. You're good to go. Goodbye. So the fact that he actually is like, how can I help you was huge. And I told him what I wanted. And right away, he's like, yep, let's try to make it happen. He didn't question it. He didn't try to talk me out of anything I wanted. He just understood it. And I think having Theo's experience too helped reassure him that it wasn't just wishful thinking, that I was actually really serious about what I wanted. Um, and he didn't ask me why. He just accepted it. He did lay out the risks to me, but it was in such a different way. They were the same risks as the Twin Clinic, the exact same ones. Um, he went through the different scenarios, but the way he explained those risks to me was in a very fact-based way and a very objective way. So it didn't feel like he was trying to influence me in any way. Um, he gave me numbers. He would say, well, the risk increases from 2 to 4%. Are you willing to take that risk? I'm like, well, that's not a big increase. Yes, I'm fine with that. Okay. The risk is 1 in 1,000, 2 in 1,000. He used actual numbers, whereas the Twin Clinic, every time they talked about risks, would stay very vague. They would say it's too risky. Oh, a breech, twin birth, too risky. I say, well, what does that mean? How risky is it? We wouldn't take the risk. Or manual extraction, too painful. Well, yeah, but what does that mean? Like, it's just too painful, too risky. That wasn't good enough for me.
Well, because it
Whereas
wasn't
Dr.
your
Bissett,
opinion,
no, no,
like
exactly.
it's about what do you
That's
think
what I
is too
mean. It
risky?
was
Yeah. Hmm.
exactly, it was too loose, it's, and I said, well, I have a high tolerance for pain. Maybe I'm okay with it. They're like, nah, you wouldn't be. Okay, well, whereas with Dr. Bisitz, he actually even said, I've had experience with women who found manual extraction actually very manageable, didn't find it painful at all. Some told me, yes, it was very painful, but it only lasted a few seconds. It was okay. We have these different options too for pain relief if we are to do manual extraction, if you choose to have some pain relief. It doesn't have to be straight to an epidural. There are other options to help, so he would go through the same risks and talk to me about the same scenarios, but it was so refreshing because it was like he was arming me with the information I needed to make decisions. Like I felt like for the first time in months, I was part of the decision-making party, which you should be when you're giving birth. You just should be. But it was the first time I felt like, wow, I actually have a say. He's giving me back a bit of control. And then he did something huge, which I did not expect at all. He said, he actually asked me, this is what's so funny with him too, is he was, would you be okay if I took you out of the twin clinic and moved you under the MGP? And I was like, it's like someone saying, would you be okay if I gave you $1 million? No strings attached. It's like, well, duh. Yes. I was in the MGP in the first place and I moved to the twin clinic. And that was the best possible news I could hear. And that's what I love too about Dr. Bisits is that he really puts a really big importance on midwives and their role in giving birth. And I think that's huge. And like I said, I couldn't see midwives through the twin clinic. It just wasn't an option because I was too high risk. So you go straight to the team, like the registrars that are part of an OB's team, and you don't talk to midwives. And that was, and I was so relieved I didn't have to go back to the twin clinic. So relieved because my last appointment with them, I think I remember, we talked about that appointment. I left so distraught after that last appointment. Knowing I would never have to go back was a huge weight off my shoulders. And being part of the MGP was like the best news I could hear, like at that point in my life. And my anxiety levels went from panic levels of I'm going to hide at home and give birth in my living room to I can't wait to give birth now. And beyond moving me from the twin clinic to the MGP, he also said he would take on my birth, and he said, "That's it. I'll be there for your birth. We'll make sure I'm there for your birth." And I was 33 weeks pregnant, so pretty close to the end when this happened. So went through a lot of the pregnancy with a poor level of support, and then things just completely flipped, a complete 180 at 33 weeks.
Yeah. Boy, do I remember that day. That was fun. That was such a gift, yeah. And we will, the plan is to ask Bisits for his time and join us at the second part of this podcast so that we can hear it from his perspective, because obviously he was such a pivotal role in all of this and such an enormous support person for you. And really without him, it wouldn't look this way. But tell us how the twins were born, please.
So I made it to 37 weeks, and which I was very excited about, namely because it was Theo's second birthday and I didn't want to miss his party. So I was very glad I was able to be there for his party. But then, and I knew that because I was still giving birth at the hospital, I still had to play the game somewhat. So I couldn't push too far in terms of delaying an induction, even though I felt no pressure from the team to be induced. But in my mind, I'm like, okay, I'll be giving birth to these twins around 38 weeks. So I asked to start having stretch and sweeps around 33 plus 37, weeks plus 3. And they, because it was early, like with Theo, I feel like one stretch and sweep kind of kicked off labor, but it was practically my due date. It was 2 days before my due date. With the twins, it was 2 weeks before my due date, more than 2 weeks before my due date. So nothing much was happening. I was getting some cramping and I dilated a little bit, but like not much was happening. But the whole team, including you, were just like waiting by your phones. I just felt like my MGP midwife, Dr. Bisits, and you were just all waiting by the phone going, this is imminent. She's going to give birth she's going to go into labor any second. And I think we all knew that it would be a really quick labor. I didn't think we realized how quick it was going to be. I'll get to that.
No, we
But
did not.
we all knew based on Theo, first contraction to him coming out was about 8 hours, which is very quick for a first birth. So I think everyone's like, oh, second birth, this is going to be even quicker. At that point, my biggest fear wasn't even giving birth to the twins. My biggest fear was not having Dr. Bisits, my midwife, and you present. That was my biggest fear. And that meant a part of me almost didn't want to go into labor in the middle of the night because I thought that would be really stressful for me to have to rush to the hospital knowing you're on your way, but maybe an hour away, that Dr. Bisits may not get there before I do, that my midwife may not be like, and that was really stressful because in my situation, I knew the hospital, if it was someone else, and we talked about this, we actually talked about it in our appointments together too, that if the team wasn't there to stop a C-section, I would be prepped for a C-section. Period. That there
Absolutely.
was no, they weren't just going to go, oh, let's wait for Dr. Bisits. That's fine. I mean, they may have, but it was unlikely. So
Mm.
really needed the team there almost before me, but I also had to rush to the hospital because we knew labor would probably be quick. So that was my biggest fear. And I think I had my first rest and sleep on the Wednesday, second on the Thursday, third on the Friday morning, and you were there. Dr. Bisits was there. My midwives were there. And I just remember having this moment of like, just induce me. Just, I want to give birth today because you're all here. I knew the next day my midwife was, had a day off for her son's birthday. I was like, and I knew you were going to be heading back home. And I thought, look, I just want to give birth today. You guys are all here. It was a beautiful day, really sunny. I had all my hospital bags ready. I was ready. I was mentally ready. And my team was there. And this is what's so interesting is when I said, induce me, um, not only did I feel zero pressure from Dr. Bisits or the midwives, but Dr. Bisits even said, let's wait until this afternoon. Let's give it 4 or 5 hours because he was so convinced I would go into labor naturally. Um, I was very happy to have that time. And I think that time actually helped me because I remember was hanging out with you and my best friend, Celine, got my favorite smoothie at Kelly Press, was doing, curb walking and lunges, and you were giving me massages and using oils. And I think all of these things helped contribute to preparing me mentally and physically. Probably helped open up my body a little bit. And even though, I was still dilated the same by the time they checked me at 2 p.m., but I think that extra time actually really helped and made it to 2 p.m. And I was in this beautiful birthing suite too. So the team was there and the room was beautiful. And I was like, I feel ready, So um, did a last scan at 2 p.m. Arthur was still in his little stubborn breech position. um, and Ella, so my twin B, was head down. And that is actually one of the riskiest scenarios with a vaginal twin birth because there's a risk of headlock. So it means that if twin A is head down and twin A is breech and twin A is head down, twin A's head could start coming out before Ella's head could have started coming out before Arthur's head
Yes.
was coming out. So it could have blocked both of their oxygen levels and there could be some really bad consequences of a headlock. And it's not something that is researched much at all because in most countries all over the world, if there is a risk of headlock, if twin A is breech and twin B is head down, it's an automatic C-section. So they don't even try to see if it's going to happen. And there's only one OB in the world that I know of, or that we all know of, in the US, who had actually studied it a little bit and come up with a maneuver to unlock the heads because he was supporting home births with twins. And you had spoken to him, and Dr. Bisits had also read some of his papers and done some research just based on my birth, my pregnancy. Sorry, but I still felt the mood shift at that point. I don't know how you remember that moment, but I know Dr. Bisits even asked for a second opinion from another sonographer to come in and double check and say how exactly is she positioned? Where is she facing? How close is her head to the birth canal and Arthur? And it's not what we all wanted to see or hear because obviously if a headlock happened, Dr. Bissis had never experienced that. And like I said, it could be really bad. So Dr. Bissit said he was going to leave the room for a little bit with the midwives. It felt like they were gone for hours, but I'm pretty sure they were only gone for like 30 minutes. It's so funny how my mind works. That's really twisted maybe, but I wasn't nervous about the headlock. I was nervous that he would come back and say I needed a C-section. That was my biggest fear at that moment. I don't know why. I call it recklessness or mother's intuition. I don't know. I wasn't worried about the headlock. I just wasn't.
Mm.
And he came back and said that he had practiced unlocking heads, the heads with dolls and a fake pelvis. And he said, and it worked. And he goes, so I'm good to go. Are you good to go? And I'm like, yeah, okay, sure. I mean, he had never done this in real life, but he just practiced on dolls and was confident. And so I was like, if you're comfortable, I'm comfortable. And I think it's that mutual confidence and trust that also really helped us work well together as a team. So at that point, he broke Arthur's waters, and um, I think my first contraction was about 30 to 45 minutes later, and um, and they were trying to give me a cannula and couldn't because I was so swollen. And I just remember sitting on this ball and they were trying to give me this cannula and poking me everywhere. And that was actually probably the most uncomfortable part of the whole birth experience, was
Wow.
probably getting that cannula. Um, and it's a bit of a blur, but it feels like the contractions just started. They picked up so quickly. Like as soon as the cannula was put in, um, I was just in like it was like this giant contraction, never ending. It felt like there was no break. And with Theo, like I said, it was such a textbook labor experience where I could almost picture and visualize this graph in my head of the pain, going up, peak, going down. And I'd reach the peak and go, okay, just a few seconds of this, you can get through this, you can get through this. And then I go down and then I have a break and go back to acting normally and everything was fine. Here, if I had to draw a graph of the pain I felt and the contractions, it was just like this plateau with like little moments of dip and then back up and a little dip and back up. And there was no break. So I wasn't communicating with you guys at all because I was just in the zone. What was amazing is we had managed to agree that I could stay mobile, so I didn't have to be pinned to a bed, which was better for a breech birth in any case because Dr. Bisits likes to encourage women to sit on a birthing stool for a breech birth, which is not very compatible with having an epidural or being pinned to a bed. So I was so grateful that I could actually be, and the best position for me was standing and leaning forward against the bed. So I just stayed in that position the whole time and did all my breathing exercises. And then I reached this moment. I was really in the zone. It's like there are two people inside of you when you're going through labor, or in my experience at least. There's the kind of rational side that's still paying attention to what's going on outside and going, ooh, they keep losing the heart rate, but I'm not worried because I know it's just because the stupid things keep falling, whatever.
Yeah.
Or I feel them scrambling, or I feel Anna Marie behind me doing a compression massage, But then there's this other side of you that's just really in the moment, in the zone. Like that's the one that's communicating with the baby and going, this is fine. Let's just keep going. Let's keep going. Let's keep going. And I reached a point, which was probably transition phase, but everything was so quick. Like I said, it's just a blur where, once the rational side of me is like, okay, you better start pushing soon because the pain's becoming too intense. And if this goes on for much longer, we're going to be begging for drugs. And the other side going, well, we're not ready to push, leave me alone. And it's like, well, we got to push soon anyway. And there was like this debate in my mind of, but I didn't feel that urge to push that I felt with Theo. Again, the textbook labor with Theo was like, all of a sudden my contractions turned into wanting to push. Here, that wasn't the case. It was like, I need to start pushing because it's too painful, which didn't feel like the right, you know,
Yeah.
right, good enough reason. But somehow I still made my way to the birthing stool and thought, I'm just going to start pushing and see what happens because I can't take this pain anymore. And the side of my head's like going, this is ridiculous. You're going to be on that thing for hours because you don't have to push yet. The other one's like, well, I don't care. I'm going to start pushing whether I have the urge to push or not. Like it was just really funny. And, but in no scenario in my mind, like what was going to happen happened. like, um, so I sat on the birthing stool and I pushed for, I think the report said 3 minutes. And again, not communicating with the team in any way. I think you guys, of course, saw me walking to the birthing stool, but probably had no idea what was going on. And Arthur just plopped out. And you have the video, you took a video of it, which is brilliant. You can just see him just fall out of me.
Yep.
And then Dr. Bisits just happened to be there. I think he was just there checking in on me. He caught him and then handed him to me and goes, here's your baby. And I was like in shock. Like, what do you mean? I didn't even feel pain when he came out. I had no idea he was about to come out. I had no idea he was that low. I didn't feel pressure, pain, and nothing. And that was about, I'd say, less than an hour after my contractions started. Like about
Yeah.
an hour after my contractions started. So, really quick. And all of a sudden he was there. And in the video, I can see, because I don't remember any of this, but the midwives scrambling to take my robes off so that we could have skin to skin right away. So when I grabbed him, I held him against my chest, and just kind of like in autopilot, just because I was still in shock, made my way to the bed because we'd agreed that I would do that for them to check Ella's position and how she was doing. So I walked over to the bed with him in my arms, still attached to his placenta, holding him, still going like, what just happened? Like, laid down in the bed and wasn't feeling any contractions anymore at that point. Was just, again, trying to process the whole thing and enjoy these first moments with Arthur. So I was grateful the team was actually focused on Ella, because I wasn't. Like, I was just like, I don't know what's just happened.
You weren't
Honestly.
blissfully, yeah, I've had a baby. That's where you were.
Yes.
Yeah.
But also how to, like, 5 minutes ago I didn't even want to push, and now he's here. Like, I don't even understand what just happened. And I remember, I think Dr. Bisits broke her waters, but I'm not even sure. Because I was starting to close up, apparently, because I wasn't feeling contractions, and he was telling me to push, and I thought that was really odd because I wasn't feeling any contraction or anything. And I didn't really know what I was doing. I was pushing without knowing what I was doing. But I would push when he told me to push. And one point he invited me to touch her head, and I'm like, how is she already there? Like, but fine, weird. And then he said, oh, she'll just slide out. And I'm like, what? Since when do babies just slide out? And my midwife Petra moved Arthur over and said, make room for your sister. And I'm thinking, well, that's very premature. Like, surely it's not going to be this quick. And all of a sudden she's on my chest. And the video they took shows she did literally slide out head first on her back. And I guess Arthur paved the way for her in a way, but
Yeah.
um, and she was on my chest, and I had my babies, and she was born 9 minutes after Arthur, and the whole thing took, so it was less than 2 hours after they broke my waters, or Arthur's waters, and I couldn't believe it. Like, the emotions, like, it's so much buildup, and I was thinking back at all the buildup throughout the pregnancy. All the discussions around risks and scenarios, and if this happens and that happens, and manual extractions, uh, and I just pushed the babies out, and they just came out.
All of that risk was, and there you had the most slippery, slidery birth.
Yeah,
They literally slipped out. Well, that's why we're having this conversation, and why both of us feel so strongly about sharing your story and this journey, because no one's going to believe it. Like, if we, like, it's so rare for this to happen. It doesn't really happen much, and yet here you are, you did it. And yes, you're a second-time mum. I think there is some differences in a
yeah,
primate, a first-time mum versus a multip, and so that's a factor. But still, it's not like anyone ever said you had the option to give birth naturally. So this is, our wish really is for other people out there, to hear that there is another way. Potentially there is another way, all depending. There's so many levels of factors in this, which you've touched on, but with the right team, and I think really your mindset was everything. Your trust, your knowledge around birth, your willingness, and just like you said, you were more worried about Dr. Bisits coming in saying we can't do this because of their position, instead of worrying about how you're going to give birth to 2 babies in the near future. And that's what's so profound, in my opinion, because none of this would have happened if it wasn't for that mindset of yours, for that just like deep belief and trust that this was going to happen. I think if you had started doubting yourself, everything would have fallen apart. Like, it was like your strength, your mindset is what kept us all like on track, believing that, okay, we're just doing this. It was so led by you, but of course you needed that medical support, in this case, and it was so unique to find that, and there aren't that many Dr. Bisits out there, or even the midwives that were present. There aren't many of those either, in terms of knowing what to do. So yeah, this is just to say that with the right mindset, you can do so much more than what the system allows you.
And I think like if I think most women could have this mindset if they weren't scared by the medical professionals, and if they educated themselves. Because, like I said, what really spoke to me the most was the whole discussion around hormones and how as soon as you're afraid, your body's going to react by generating like the fear hormone, which will make your baby go, "Ooh, I can't come out now. I have to stay inside," which will create it, risk of distress and like all these complications and need for interventions and things. So I think a part of me was like, "Oh, I have to embrace this and not be afraid." And it's easier to say than do, of course. Like, you can't just not be afraid, you can't just switch it off. But by educating yourself enough and by having the right team, but it's also the team, like you say, it's me. But if I'd had a stressed out, OB in the room, if I'd had my mom in the room, if I'd had the wrong people in the room, and nothing against my mom, it's just that someone who's not a medical professional, who's not, who actually will be nervous about your situation and transfer that to you. If you're collecting the wrong emotions from the people around you, then it can lead to very different outcomes. If Dr. Fan, you hadn't been that calm with Theo, I maybe would have caved and said I want an epidural.
Mm.
Um, if Dr. Bisits had come back saying, "Oh, I tried with the dolls, I'm not too sure. What do you think?" And I maybe would have just freaked out. So it's a fragile balance, and it requires having the right team and the right level of education. And I think it's
Yes.
achievable for most women, but what's hard is finding that right team, like you said. That's the challenge.
Yeah, that is truly the challenge. So, you've touched a little bit on it as we've talked already, but tell us why, like why did you want a vaginal or low intervention birth? Like why? Because often the thing I talk to the women I support is I need them to know why they want to do this because birth is hard work. It is a bit of an endurance one way or the other. And so I really believe that if we know why we want to do something, that's going to help us, get a large portion of the way. So tell us a little bit about your inner why. Like, why did you do this? Why did you go through all that hard work? Why didn't you just surrender and go, okay, all right, if that's what you think, I need a C-section, so be it.
So with the twins particularly, because with Theo, I wouldn't have been as resistant to intervention because I didn't know better. But having experienced that birth high with Theo, I realized how powerful that birth high is and how helpful it can be in the postpartum phase where any mother is very fragile, um,
Hmm.
tired, hormonal, it's big life-changing moment, etc. So I was craving that birth high. Again, I was pretty fragile mentally after my miscarriages, brain surgeries, and other things that happened to me that year. And I thought I need as much help as I can possibly get to set myself up for success in the postpartum phase. So that was the main reason. And that's why I fought so hard to avoid birth trauma, because I thought if I experience birth trauma, it may push me over the edge and I will not be a good mother to my children. If I have a very good positive birth experience, it's like, it helps just create more balance from all the trauma I'd already gone through that year. That would be the really big positive experience that helps counterbalance all of that and helps me just feel stronger mentally, to be a better mother to my children. And that's what I think is really unfortunate is there's not enough consideration, or they don't. It feels like the teams too that support labor and birth in the hospitals, they just support you until the baby's out, and as soon as it's out, it's like goodbye, all right, nice, this was nice.
Very
Or they support
true.
you for maybe a few days, and then it's like bye bye, and they never follow up, and so many women go home, um, still processing what's just happened, not knowing what just happened. And um, that's what I didn't even expect, or I completely underestimated with Theo, that I this birth high had a huge impact on how I felt and how well I did as a single mother.
Mm.
Huge. Um, you know, it wasn't easy when I had Theo, but breastfeeding was a disaster. We're in the peak of COVID lockdown. Sleep was tough, but I just kept reliving this birth in my mind, and it made me happy, and it made me
Mm.
proud and empowered and strong. And I was like, you know what? If you can give birth vaginally without drugs, then you can get through another night of not sleeping,
Yes,
Um,
yes.
and with the twins, it was even more important because I had Theo and I was about to be a single mother of three, 2 and under. And everyone kept telling me how are you going to do it? And it's going to be a disaster. Like everyone, I was just like, yeah, I know I have to get through this. And if at the very least I can have an amazing birth experience, that's something like an anchor that I can tie myself, like whenever moments are
Yes.
tough, I can go back to that birth experience and go, you know what? You're badass. You did this.
Mm,
You
mm,
can get through, another yogurt tantrum with Theo while the one twin's screaming and the other one's vomiting, right? You can get through that because you've gotten through this big thing. And I didn't want them to deprive me of that.
mm.
Plus, what's also really sad is no one tells you about the risks associated with C-sections or epidurals ever because they're not risks for the babies too much. Like, there are probably still risks for the babies, but they're not medically important, right? The number of women I spoke to too who told me how they had side effects from their epidurals, like horrific migraines or, the shivers and shakes and fevers and things, or feeling really numb on one side of the body, or and C-sections, like having much more issues with like abdominal separation and like a bulge that they can't get rid of, or the pain, the scar, no one talks about those things. I didn't have, and that's another thing too, the vaginal birth. I'm like, I won't have any of those things.
That's right.
I can stand up, like as soon as I give birth, I can stand up. And that's what I did with you after the twins went and got shower, took a shower. And then I
Yeah,
walked to my room with the twins and, I was up and about. And when I came home, I was able to give Theo a big hug and hold him in my arms. And I wanted
yeah.
all that too. So it's not just the mental side of things, it's also the physical side of things. I was like, I don't want to do things to my body that will potentially drag on for weeks after I give birth and make me more fragile physically.
Mm,
I, we're made to give birth. And so that scenario is the one where we end up the strongest physically as well,
yeah.
you know? And the last thing I'll just say, and is just, I find it so sad. Giving birth is probably one of the biggest life events that you can, like, I'm talking about the postpartum phase, but it follows you for your whole life, how you
Mm,
gave birth.
it does.
It's probably one of the biggest events. Like other events I can think of that are maybe similar are, getting married, or, when your children graduate, or like there are other big events when your children get married and when they have children, but giving birth is huge.
Mm,
And I'll be sharing the birth story with my kids of how they were born. They'll have that in mind when they have their own kids, and it'll follow us for probably one or two generations, right? Um, and it's so sad that we don't spend as much time preparing for it as we would for a wedding or for something else, because it'll follow
yes.
us for our whole lives. And you have women who talk about still processing their traumatic births years later, or have never processed it, and then years later they find out, oh, I should have processed that birth. And that's what I find really sad, that there's not um, that a lot of medical professionals don't see it that way. They just
Mm,
see it as, we just need to get these babies out in a healthy way. It doesn't matter what state the mom ends up in.
yeah. And that, if you think about it, as a mother of three, single mother of three, that really wasn't an option. I remember we talked about that several times. You didn't have that option of having a C-section and not
No.
being able to go home and lift your kids and do
Mhm.
this by yourself, because that is your family situation. You don't have family here. And so that was such a big component that no one really took the time to honor in the hospital, because that would have been a dramatically different postpartum. And like you've just said yourself, you needed to go home and hug your Theo. You needed to normalize life for him quickly with two little critters coming home with you. So that's such a big part, like that you've said, that they think about their little component of their role in that birth, whereas you have a whole life. And you
Yeah.
have to, and it's so true. The way we start out on motherhood kind of lays down the foundation. There's a lot of things we can do with therapy and all kinds of things. But what you're talking about, that postpartum high, that's the chemical bond, the deep, like brain cellular change that happens for us when we get to have that high after birth. That is what wires us to love them despite the endless nights and despite the feeding blah and the things that happen. That is so, so hard, let alone being a single mum in that equation. You really needed all the ammunition you could
Exactly.
gather. And that comes from that natural birth high that we can get when we do this way. So that was, you know, a bit like that was a big concern. If you didn't have that, how was the postpartum going to look for you? That was pretty massive. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I can see why that was the driving force, that's for sure, both physically, mentally and emotionally. And I will just correct you, because your birth story or their birth stories is not going to stay just for 2 generations. This story is going to be hanging around for a lot of generations. Trust me on that one, because like we've said, you know, this doesn't happen. It is so rare for this type of birth to happen, let alone like a singleton as just having one baby and having no intervention. That's, I mean, that's what
Oh,
we're
I'm
fighting
hoping
for.
it'll be more and more common, though. That's my hope, that at least a few generations from now, it'll be more
Let's
common.
hope, let's
'Cause,
hope,
yeah.
let's hope. There's some of us out here fighting for it, and you will be definitely fighting for it. But anyways, I think your story will be shared for many generations. So before we end this part of our conversation, before Bisits joins us, how has the postpartum been? Like, what's it like being a single mom of 3?
It's really it's interesting. It's hectic, but I'm actually I had a bit of an aha moment with what you just said earlier. I think you're right. This like birth high not only helped me with the postpartum phase with the twins, but also you said it's that footprint, like not footprint, sorry, blueprint. I'm tired. That blueprint. And I think I'm finding it oddly very manageable. Like it's very hard, but it's very manageable. And I think it's because it wasn't too disruptive for Theo. I didn't come back from the hospital a completely different person, wrecked mentally, physically, whatever it was. I came back myself. And um, the main challenge I have these days is sleep deprivation, but I'm getting the kids, they're all being well taken care of. I'm enjoying my time with them. It's just the energy thing that I'm finding challenging, like finding that energy and finding time for me. But it's yeah, it's not as hard as everyone told me it would be. And I would say everyone told me, because I was trying to be hopeful. I'm an optimist as well. I try to be an optimist. But man, everyone, not a single, like only I think only my friend Celine was saying you'll find what works for you, and you'll be fine. She was the only one. Everyone else, you're screwed. What are you going to do? You need to get a full-time au pair. You need to get a nanny. You need to get this. You need to get that. You can't do this on your own. You can't, you can't, you can't. And that's all I heard from everyone. And look, I'm not out of the woods yet, because they're still babies. They're still easy. They just, I go out with Theo, and it's still easy to just drag them along, and they just happily sit in the stroller.
Mhm.
Of course, once they start moving and running in different directions, and you know and I have 3 tantrums at the same time, or like I'll be going through different challenges as they grow. But so far so good. I was extremely nervous. My mom did come to help out when they were first born. When she left, I was extremely nervous, but I actually found that I managed better on my own. I
Interesting.
did have a mother's helper come in a few days a week for a while, but again, I kind of like, oh, I was kind of like, I don't need her.
Mm.
I actually don't need her. um, and yeah, I think it's just a matter of going with the flow, being in tune with your children. um, you know you do prioritize a lot. You go, okay, who's crying the loudest, whose need is the most important right now, because sometimes they want things at the same time. There's a lot of running around. Yes, for sure. um, but I'm loving it. Like, it's also a lot of love. It's a lot of smiles. It's a lot of heartwarming moments. Seeing them interact. The twins are starting to look at each other and just smile at each other. Theo's starting
Oh.
to. Sometimes he's a bit rough now, because he's realized, oh, they're actually a bit more solid and strong than I thought. So now I can try to test how strong they are until they start crying. But anyway, he's
Uh-oh.
starting that little, yeah. But he's still trying to play with them. He loves them. He's very protective. Other kids come towards them. He goes, they're mine. And it's kind of beautiful to watch as well.
Mm. I mean, wow. I don't know. I wish I could give you a medal. I know you have 3 of them. You have 3 medals and a smile on your face. I mean, that says everything. But just, I mean, I had the pleasure of being there with you and seeing, and then that this has been such a big event for me as well as a doula, and well, just as a fellow mom, to see what you've done and how you did that. That was bloody epic. But you're so joyous inside, despite the challenge, and you've had some challenges, let's face it. Um, and you feel them when they're there. So it's not that you just always walk around like a happy chicken. It's not like that at all. You know, you are very genuine about what's going on for you. What are you feeling? And I think that's a big component to how you manage to do all this and how you continue to do this as a mother of three. But that you are so you honor what's happening, what's going on for you, and you dive into it and you deal with it. I think this is a really important element to our mental health as mothers in general. But it was so crucial for you to, stay really focused on what's going on for me. How do I get the help, and how do I get the next step in the right direction, not the wrong direction? But having been to your home and visiting you in the early days when I was coming to help a little bit, I mean, I could still hear you giggle in the bath with Theo while I was juggling the twins, thinking, oh my God, and I have 4 kids, but I don't have twins. That's different. So you just have such a deep joy and love for your kids and for life. I think it's a huge part of how you live and how you think. So that is a big testament to how you did this. But I hope that the story has been inspiring for other women in whatever the situation, even if they're even if they're pregnant with 1 child, just hearing others' story. I think this is how we learn. This is how we gather our information. This is what you did. I did it for myself. I know women do this. We listen to each other's stories, and then we gather little inspirations, and then we find our own journey. And your journey was so unique and so profound that I hope it has given women the insights that, when you put your mind to it and your heart to it, things could unfold very differently than what you might initially hear. So thank you so much, Charlotte, for doing this with me. And we will come back with Dr. Bisits and talk to him, because he was such a huge role for you and for the twins in making this happen. And we have to assume that that wasn't straightforward for him either, but we would obviously love to hear it from him. So thank you so much for sharing all of this in such detail
Oh,
with
my
us.
pleasure. Thank you so
Is
much,
there
Andrea.
anything I haven't asked that you would like to say before we end this part?
No, I can't think of anything. Just that if this can help even just one woman have a better birth experience, that would be a huge win for me, because I would love for more women to be able to experience what I experienced.
Yeah, beautiful. If women wanted to reach out to you, how you were searching the web and listening to every possible thing. If anyone wanted to reach out to you or find you, what would be the best way for them to do that? And I'll link it in the
Um,
notes.
I'm guessing maybe just friending me on Facebook and messaging me on Messenger or something like that would probably be the best way.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye.